I heard that you want to become a master manifester. I heard that you want to manifest all your dreams and probably even fast. And that's why you got into the law of attraction and the law of assumption. But what if I'm here to tell you that there are actually 7 natural laws of the universe that, in my opinion, you should know in order to attain self-mastery? If you're interested, just keep on watching. Hello everyone, my name is Naya, and on this channel we talk about manifestation, esotericism, and so much more. On Patreon, I make weekly video that you can watch. Link is down below, as well as my services. But now let's get started with today's topic. Today's topic is the 7 Hermetic Principles, the 7 mystical laws of the universe interpreted by Gnostics. I will get into the history of Gnosticism and the 7 Hermetic Principles in a second, but what you guys need to understand is first is the meaning of principle and why I'm calling them the 7 laws of this universe. These laws were discovered, were brought into humanity 2,000 years ago, way before certain discoveries or recent scientific discovery that we have, and they are mind-blowing. When we are talking about a principle, when we're talking about a law, we're talking about something that explains how the universe functions. And if we apply these laws and we understand them, we will gather mastery of our own reality. It's like saying death is an inevitable thing, or apple fall from the sky, which is the law of gravity. The universe is constructed by determined laws that we cannot change, but we can use in order to move our reality and to live happy, joyful lives. It's not just, oh, I assume whatever I want. It is true that there is a degree of assumption that you can have that are based on your belief system. And in that sense, of course, you create your own rules and you can get whatever you want. You can manifest everything that you want. But still, what you guys need to understand, and I'm not making this up, this is like a knowledge of ancient humanity. I'm not making this. You cannot make these things up. These laws govern the universe and we are all under them. At least this universe where we live. Before I get started, make you understand better the 7 Hermetic Principle. Many people commented on one of my community posts about the meaning of principle, saying that it's just a mere assumption and therefore you can change it. No, principles are laws. In fact, from the Cambridge Dictionary, when I write down what principle means, I have a basic idea or a rule that explains or controls how something happens or works. Rule is a synonym with law. So principle is a synonym with law, Cambridge Dictionary. And therefore, a law explains or controls how something happens or works. The 7 Hermetic Principles, the 7 Hermetic natural laws explain how the universe works and explain how to control it. Now, if you're still interested, let's dive deeper into the 7 Hermetic Principles. So 2,000 years ago, in the valley of the Nile, there was a god called Thoth. If you guys were passionate about the ancient Egyptian, perhaps in school, or if you haven't heard of them, Thoth was a mystical figure and a mystical god of the scripture, magic, and of knowledge. He was the husband of Ma'at, the goddess of justice, but Ma'at for the ancient Egyptian was the principle of justice in and of itself. She was the cosmic force of balance. And it's not a coincidence that they were a husband and wife for the ancient Egyptian, because together they have wrote the book of the law. Now, Thoth is mostly recognized for this book through various scriptures. One of the ones that is the earliest one found where you can find the 7 Hermetic Principle is the Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet was found in ancient Egypt and it contains the 7 Hermetic Principle. Later on, there is a mixture between the god Hermes in ancient Greek, which is Mercury, and the god Thoth. In fact, we know that the ancient Roman, the ancient Greek, and the Egyptian actually shared the same gods, but they named them differently. And according to the Greek, the same exact laws are found in another text that is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus, according to the legend, could have been a philosopher that really existed, or could have been the god Thoth himself. Nobody is able to know that. However, we know from ancient Greek text that he has written a book called Corpus Hermeticum. The Corpus Hermeticum is the fundamental basis of Gnosticism and the knowledge of Hermetica. Now, later on, the Corpus Hermeticum was translated and reinterpreted in what is now called and is now known as the Kabbalion. The Kabbalion is a more modern version of the same principle listed clearly for all of you guys to understand. And today we are going to refer to the Kabbalion, and we are going to talk about the 7 laws in the way the Kabbalion expressed them to be. What you also need to know is what is Hermetism at large. The Hermetic tradition represents a non-Christian lineage of Gnosticism, which is the name for a variety of ancient religious ideas and systems dating back to the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. In fact, the surviving writings of Hermetism, the Corpus Hermeticum that we were talking about before, which is composed by a series of scripture of the master Hermes Trismegistus that tries to enlighten the people in order to find out the mysteries of the universe and in order to discover self-mastery, was rediscovered in the 15th centuries and translated in Latin by Cosimo de' Medici, one of the patrons of Leonardo da Vinci. These letters were so influential on that time that they contribute to the rise of the Italian Renaissance. The Kabbalion instead that I just referred to was a book that interpreted the Corpus Trismegistus in more modern term, and is one of the fundamental books that has influenced the New Thought religion, Neville Goddard himself, as well as New Age at large, and all the spiritual philosophies that you find on YouTube are heavily influenced by the Kabbalion, which was published in 1908 by William Walker Atkinson. And the Kabbalion is pretty much the fundamental basis for the law of assumption, not just the Bible, and the philosophy of mentalism itself. And now that we have made this brief introduction and a little bit of history, we can talk about the first Hermetic law, the first Hermetic principle of this universe. The first Hermetic principle really reminds me of Neville Goddard and one of the first chapters that I have ever read in The Power of Your Imagination. If I'm correct, that was the name of the book. And the first Hermetic principle is all is mind, is the principle of mentalism. Before creation, before anything, all was mind. All was consciousness. The principle of mentalism also explains how, in reality, not only we live in a sort of illusion, in a sort of matrix even within the universe, but we live in the mind of God, in the mind of source energy. You could put it this way: we are thoughts of a brain. We are thoughts of a greater mind. The universe itself is just one thought in God brain. And so creation was initiated itself, and this is very similar to Kabbalah tradition, but creation initiated itself by God or source energy thinking, oh, I am. Therefore, having awareness of itself. Once awareness of itself was created, thought was created, and therefore, boom, the universe started. Because all is mind, and we live in the mind of God. We live in the mind of the One. We are extension of the One. We are the One. We are the All. And obviously, the principle of mentalism is very much the law of assumption, or law of attraction, call it however you want. I think it's very much law of assumption, because the principle of mentalism is what is spread all around YouTube through all these coaches who are not saying inherently anything wrong when they're saying it's all about the mind. It's all about your thoughts. Your thoughts don't just stay in your brain. Your thoughts do manifest. So if you affirm, and you truly saturate your mind, your thoughts have to push out. Your thoughts have to be mirrored back to you in the reality, because all is mind. This is not wrong. This is the law of assumption. It's the first Hermetic principle. It's an huge, important law. And so I'm not saying that none of this is true. It is true. All is mind. However, there are other laws which are also important to consider in the process of self-mastery and in the process not only of manifestation, but in the process of living a joyful and happy life. The law of mentalism is just the first law. Now, another thing that we have to know before I introduce you to the other principles is that the Gnostic distinguish, and I highly agree with this throughout all the years of research that I've done of the spirit world and of psychic abilities and spiritual teachers and so on and so forth, right? The Gnostic distinguished the three levels of reality. We have the physical level of reality, we have the mental level of reality, and then we have the spirit level. We will discuss about this dimension of consciousness later on with the principle of correspondence. But this is also very important for the law of assumption and for the first principle of mentalism. The reason why it's important is because you have to understand that if everything is interpreted by 3 dimensions of consciousness, and to be honest, it's more than 3 dimensions because it's 12 dimensions. So within every dimension of consciousness, there are sub-dimensions of consciousness. But that is a topic for a whole new video, because otherwise this thing will become too complicated and I want to put it very simple. So let's stick with this 3 dimensions of consciousness: the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. If we understand this, then we must understand that not only our thoughts do influence our reality, and that could be the physical aspect, but our thoughts influence consciousness at large. Consciousness at large, it could indicate the mind of other people. This is why everyone is pushed out. But as well as on the spiritual plane, our thoughts affect our higher self and expand the consciousness of God itself, because all is mind. So the thoughts work on a physical level, on a mental level, and on a spiritual level as well. And also through the principle of correspondence, I swear I'm going to explain you what it is in a minute. The thoughts of the spirit world, the thoughts of the higher consciousness, the thoughts of God, or the thoughts of your higher self do influence you, as well as the thoughts or pendulums, like Vadim Zeland will put it, of the collective consciousness of the mental plane and the physical plane do also affect you to a certain degree, because everything has a degree of influence. So for instance, we could even say that the mental dimension and the various sub dimensions in between are the astral plane. This is why ghosts exist. This is why entity exists. This is why they can influence us, because they are on a mental level, and because all is mind, we influence them, they influence us. Of course, you can protect yourself. You can decide that they don't influence you, but I'm just explaining you the law. And then on a physical level, other people energy, other people thoughts do influence us, if we allow it, of course, and we can influence the thought of other people because of the law of mentalism, because thoughts are a living thing, are energy, and they go out into the quantum field and they create on various levels: physical, mental, and spiritual. Okay, this is very brief concept of the first principle of mentalism. So obviously, by understanding the first principle of mentalism, we can say that the universe is mind. We can refer to God as infinite intelligence. So we don't have to necessarily call it God, but we can call it this infinite intelligence that is constantly expanding and is constantly growing through thought, through mind. This is why on DMT or on psychedelics or on ayahuasca, we have all these reports of people seeing certain entities or talking to infinite intelligence. And when they say, I talk to infinite intelligence, they refer as a telepathic communication because of this, because we are talking about consciousness. Consciousness speaks telepathically through thoughts. Thoughts create everything. Everything that was created in the physical first started through a thought. Again, the law of assumption 101. Now, let's talk about the famous principle that I was mentioning briefly before, the law or principle of correspondence. This is a super famous principle because we find it everywhere in witchcraft, everywhere in occultism. Aleister Crowley has made his very famous sentence out of this principle. And we find it on t-shirt, we find it on horror movies, we find it everywhere. The principle of correspondence is the following: as above, so below. As within, so without. That indicates that everything has a correspondence. Nothing is a coincidence. Nothing is caused by chance. Everything is either a reflection of our thoughts, because correspondence, what does mean correspondence? Correspondence is if I'm thinking something, then I will affect reality in a way or another. So I am going to, with my thoughts, have a correspondence with what I am seeing in reality, to a level and to a degree. The same is what happens in the spirit world, what happens in the universe, what happens in consciousness does affect us as well. What happens in the physical plane does affect the higher consciousness, which, to be honest, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Dolores Cannon. Dolores Cannon was an hypnotherapist that has wrote really I think a dozen of books, I think 17 books, but there is one book that is very popular now, even on TikTok is super popular, on YouTube has been popular for such a long time, and it's called The 3 Waves of Volunteers. Now, in that book, Dolores Cannon talks about the principle of correspondence, not directly, but she mentions that after the Second World War, basically, there was a call out in the universe for volunteers to come into the earth, right? To incarnate as people. And the reason that is because in the spirit world, they were afraid that if another third world war with nuclear bombs will happen, that would have affected the entire universe, because if this world collapses, it will affect everything, the entire universe, other systems, the spirit world, everything. Why? This because of the principle of correspondence. What we do here affects the higher plane. What they do in the higher planes does affect what we do here at all level, because of the law, because of the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. I know I sound super crazy and super esoteric, but hey, we're talking about esoteric knowledge, so we gotta be mystical right here. Of course, there are things that will be beyond our knowing, like what happens truly in the spirit world and how the spirit world or even the mental plane does affect our physical plane, but still, we have to consider the law of correspondence in our day-to-day life and manifestation, and we have to experiment with the law of correspondence, knowing that we always are affecting the above, and the above is always affecting the below. The third principle or law is something that the majority of the law of assumption community just detests, and they have thrown out of the window. Now, the reason why they have thrown out of the window, I completely understand it, is because people have made it extremely complicated in the law of attraction. They have mingled too much in this principle, and it didn't help anyone, because I believe that if you don't explain this principle correctly, it's where people will reject it in the first place. And the reason that is because you can't see it. You can't see it with your physical eyes. So that is already, all this principle have to be experienced, because even explaining them sounds very intellectual, but it's not. It's common, simple knowledge. So what is this third law of the universe, and the third principle is the principle of vibration. I know some people will click off from this video. Don't click off. Let me explain you the principle of vibration first. I swear, I'm not going to talk like a law of attraction, necessarily oriented person. It's a simple principle, okay? And it's based on physics, even though it was written 2,000 years ago. So the principle of vibration explains that everything in the universe, including us, vibrate to a certain frequency. Now, we know this, guys. We know that the universe has a sound, has a vibration. We know that if we observe an atom, even on a quantum level, it does vibrate. What does it mean, vibrate? It moves. That's all that it means. So don't get too complicated in the word vibration. Vibration is movement. So the third principle of vibration only states that nothing in the universe remains still. Everything changes and everything moves. And this is the reason why so many coaches out there, they are correctly saying there is always movement. Now, there is always movement is not just an affirmation that you have to make to convince yourself. If you understand the laws of the universe, you will understand that what these coaches are saying is not just up in the air. Because many of them are not necessarily saying something incorrect. Now, I don't necessarily agree with every method that they use, but that's only my take and it's just my opinion. But the knowledge that they're taking from Neville Goddard and so on and so forth, it's not wrong. So when they are saying, any other person, not just me, is telling you there is always movement, it's not because you have to assume it. It's not because you have to believe it. It's the way the universe operates. There is always movement. The universe, as we are speaking right now, is physically expanding. This is not a belief. This is not something that you have to believe in. Your atoms, the energy is vibrating, is moving. You feeling certain emotions are creating a vibration and you are moving. Nothing remains stagnant. So even when you're manifesting and you get discouraged or you're thinking, oh my God, I don't see movement, everything is so stagnant, that's only a perception. It's never true. There is always movement because of this natural law of vibration. Everything is music, everything has sound, even sounds that you cannot hear, but moreover, everything has vibration. And I will dare to say that actually many people will say that the language of the universe is numbers and is geometry. I agree. However, deeper, I will say that the true language of the universe is vibration. And we also know in physics that when a vibration is really, really slow, it appears like it's not even moving. But when a vibration of something is really, really high, it looks like it's moving so fast. So remember that most of the time, even though there is a delay period between your thoughts and the mirror reality, when you're not manifesting rapidly, you're not doing anything wrong. But it could be because the vibration is lower. And so this reality looks like it's very stagnant and it's not moving, but it's only because the vibration of this reality is very dense. And do you know where I experienced the principle of vibration? I experienced the principle of vibration through psychedelics and through DMT. You can watch my video, and I'm not suggesting you to take drugs or anything like that. However, hear my experience. What I remember through psychedelics, and I have 2 videos about it, ayahuasca, psychedelics, medicine plant, and DMT. I remember vividly that when I was on DMT especially, I felt outside of my consciousness and I was feeling so light. So light. When I went back into my body, or what it felt to me like going back to my body, the first thing that I told to the person that was in front of me is that, oh my God, I said this, oh my God, the ego, my thoughts are up here, and this reality, it is so dense, the vibration is so low, and that's why it's hard to hear the spirit world, and that it's why everything seems like it's not moving. It's only because this reality is so dense. So when I read the Kabbalion later on, I refreshed it and I found the principle of vibration, and I was really surprised because that's exactly the feeling that I got through DMT and stuff like that. Anyway, I have made a video about DMT. So when you're not seeing movement, it's not because there isn't movement, but because this 3D reality, the 3D in general, so what you can touch, feel, smell, what you can perceive with your eyes, with your sensorium, it's very, very dense in vibration. And so it will look like, it will trigger you, trick you to think that there is no movement, but it's not true. Because remember the 3 planes of existence for the Gnostic: the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. You are only perceiving the physical. You are only perceiving a layer of reality with also your own vibration. So it's normal that it will look like nothing is moving, but it is not true. Everything in the universe always moves and is constantly changing, and the language of the universe is vibration. Now, check this out. We have talked about so far the principle of correspondence, the principle of mentalism, and the principle of vibration. The correspondence, we understood, it's a link between the two, right? So everything has a correspondence, but check this out. When you think a thought, you create an emotion, and thought, heart and mind coordination. So thoughts and emotion, what do they create? They create a vibration. So if you are aware of what you're thinking and how you're feeling, or vice versa, when you pay attention to how you feel, you can go back to what you're thinking. When thoughts and feelings, to a certain degree, it doesn't have to be that you conjure an emotion, but even Neville Goddard talked about this. When thought and feeling, you have heart and mind coordination, you vibrate on a certain frequency, and you manifest faster. Now, thought, if you just affirm, obviously will create a feeling. So that also works, but still, even if you're not aware of it consciously, you're still joining the two together, because these are the 2 principles, and you are, through the law of vibration, you are creating a certain outcome, because the language of the universe is vibration. Now, for the purpose of just manifesting a specific person, just manifesting a car, or just manifesting money, you don't necessarily even need to know the 7 Hermetic Principles. This video are for the curious ones. These videos are for the people who are bored to just hear and they want to know a little bit more about the esoteric. They want to become self-mastered of their reality. They are a little bit nerdy like me. Those videos are for you guys, okay? So don't worry if you are not interested. It's not a problem. So now let's talk about the 4th principle, which is the principle of polarity. I love this principle, so I'm going to read it for you so we understand it together. So everything is dual. Polarity, right? Negative and positive. Everything has poles. And this is a knowledge that is also found in the Kabbalah, in one of the first chapters of the Kabbalah, by the way. Everything has its pair of opposite. Like and unlike are the same. Like and unlike are the same. I'll tell you in a minute why. And we find this in religions as well, such as Hinduism, right? Shiva, Kali, and so on. And we will talk about Hinduism a little bit more. And not just with Hinduism, in a lot of other religions. Opposites are identical in nature. Opposites are identical in nature. And you might be like, what? Yes, they are. Let me explain. But different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. So, the law of polarity, the principle of polarity, reconcile what quantum physics has indeed discovered. And what Rasputin used to say, the truth, there is no truth. I love Rasputin. Anyway, so this is the thing. This is also what quantum physics says. So let's try to make it super simple. So if every possibility of reality in quantum physics, right, it's true. So with the cat of Schrödinger example, if the cat is both dead or alive and it depends on who is watching, what is the truth? The truth is based on perception, because everything is true. And opposites, the cat being dead or alive, are actually the same truth. Both are true, depending on the observer. One of the quantum waves collapses and will be true for you that the cat is dead, true for me that the cat is alive, perhaps. And that's why all truth are only half truth. Vadim Zeland in Reality Transurfing, for instance, says that as an attitude for become self-mastered of our reality, we should always perceive truth as never something ultimate, but something that we will never reach. Something like we have a truth about something, but we never really figure it out. And the reason why we never really figure it out is because we can only understand our truth from our own singular perspective. But objective truth is on the higher planes, it's on the spiritual plane, and it's in the mind of God. That's why I'm not necessarily too keen when people sound like too self-righteous or like, this is the truth and this is my way or the highway. When it comes down to manifestation, I don't agree with that, because I know this principle, because I know quantum physics. So remember, guys, the truth is within you because of the principle of polarity. Now, the principle of polarity also teaches us that a situation, anything, love, hate, sadness, happiness, they are the same exact vibration. They are the same exact thing, just in different degree of intensity. Now, this is something that's where I believe many people in the law of attraction, they got it wrong because they just skipped this principle, this law of polarity. They go like, oh, you have to vibrate on love all the time, and hate is such a bad emotion, or fear is such a bad emotion, and you shouldn't even be there. Now, this is not true, because love and fear, love and hate are literally the same exact thing. I believe a better example of the principle of polarity is to say, you have a desire, okay? Follow me through. So you want to be with your specific person, yeah? Or you want to have $1 million, whatever it is, right? So your desire has two polarities, has two things. Either you have or you don't have the $1 million. The having the $1 million is the same vibration as not having. What? It is. The only difference is the degree of intensity. So this is also the law of balance, because it teaches you that you can choose what reality to pick from. Because let's say that if I have and I don't have really belong to the same line, then why would I go to I don't have? Through the law of mentalism, through my thoughts, I can always move to the reality where I have. Now, the principle of polarity also expresses itself in the law of balance. They're the same thing, where you always have to remain in the balance. You cannot always be super happy, super joyful, and you cannot probably always be super miserable and sad. You should always strive for balance, for harmony. And everything in the universe, according to the principle of polarity, does in fact tend to harmony, and not necessarily always to entropy and always to chaos. So chaos is created, the law of entropy of the universe is created to rebalance things all the time. Same we see in our manifestation. When we get too obsessed about something, then we get opposite results in our manifestation, because that is a way of the universe to rebalance itself and put you back on a scale. So the law of polarity, I highly suggest you to read more into it, because in my opinion, it has multiple layers of interpretation, but is essentially the law of duality, the law of quantum physics, that everything is possible, the law of the want and the unwant are the same thing, only in different level of degree, as well as the law of harmony and the law of balance. Let's go to principle number 5, which is very connected to the principle of balance and polarity as well. The principle number 5, the law number 5 of the universe, is the principle of rhythm. Let's read it together. Everything flows out and in and out. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. rhythm compensate. Now, rhythm compensate because everything in life has cycle. Everything that you lose in life will go back to you. So nothing is temporary. Nothing is infinite in the physical plane, especially, but everything is constantly evolving. Everything is constantly changing through the principle of harmony, through the principle of vibration, through the principle of rhythm, which also brings me to the idea of pendulums of Adim Zealand. I made a video about it on my Patreon. So we get swing back and forth. Now, why this is important, this law, to understand not only the season and the cycle of life, which is something that the natives of Manning Land did understood. Think about the solstice and the equinox of ancient time and paganism as well. But this is very important to have self-mastery of our emotional state. Because if we do understand that we control our emotions, not just with the principle of mentalism and with our thoughts, but we understand that everything is temporary, because through the principle of vibration, everything is moving, and the principle of rhythm and polarity rebalances everything out. We can deal with our emotion, and we can have mastery of our emotion better. What do I mean, in other words? Think about this. Let's say that you have an amazing day where you got your manifestation, you got the money, you got the car, you got the house, or you got something that you really, really wanted, and you are in such a high state of excitement and joy. That is going to stay for a while, but let's be realistic. Is that going to be like that every single day? No. And that's because of the principle of rhythm. You know that your emotions do swing in and out, back and forth. The same for when you lose something and you feel sadness, you feel grief, you feel failure, you feel disappointment. Now, that is an experience that you're having, but it's not going to stay there forever. How this is going to help us? We are doomed to unhappiness, and the happiness is just something that happens once in a while. No, you can swing the rhythm to neutrality every time you want. And neutrality is the perfect state to manifest the majority of the thing that you want, which is a tiny level of detachment. That doesn't mean that you're not feeling excitement or happiness, or you're not feeling sadness, but it means that you understand the principle of rhythm. You understand emotion and the nature of emotion, and you become the master of your emotion by observing them. Because when you put yourself as the observer and you understand the nature of emotions, which is of rhythm, you understand, oh, okay, something bad happened, I'm feeling sad, but I'm observing that, and I know that this is not going to last forever. And I know that because of the principle of rhythm, even if I lost something, I will get it back. Either his equivalent or the same thing, because the wheel has to turn all the time. So as we rise, we always fall. As we fall, we always rise. And this is like, you heard this sort of mentality, especially in billionaires, people that have incredible successful business, as well as successful celebrities. And when I mean successful, I mean people that had a very long-term great career. Think about Robert De Niro. It's called Robert, right? De Niro. I think I heard him saying this, that he used to see people come and go from Hollywood, and the real secret of success is to understand the principle of rhythm, is to understand that even when you are at your highest, there is always going to be a fall, and that's okay. That's part of the game, to remain humble, to remain persistent and consistent, and to move forward with humility, with balance and harmony. He understands, like many successful people do understand not only the principle of polarity, but they do understand the principle of rhythm as well, which is how this law is governed. Things rise and fall. Things go in pattern, in cycles. We can see it all over the world. We can see in our life when we are learning certain lesson, things go in cycle because of the flow, because of the principle of rhythm. Now, the sixth principle is something that we have heard so many times before, and it is the principle of cause and effect. If you have done physics in school, you'll probably understand the physical plane of cause and effect. I observe an event and I can trace back the cause of that event because I'm observing an effect that must have a cause. However, why the Gnostic are talking 2000 years ago about something pretty simple and self-explanatory as the principle of cause and effect? Let me read it for you. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according by law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. And this sounds so much like Neville Goddard, like chance, luck, and fortune are only the word of the ignorant who doesn't understand the law. So this principle also states there are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. Nothing escapes the law. Nothing escapes the fundamental principle of mentalism, which is the first one. Nothing escapes what law? This law of cause and effect. And the Gnostic talk about this law not just on a physical plane, but because they wanted to express the fact that you, the mystic, should become the cause of the effect through the understanding of the previous law, exactly like what Neville Goddard has said. If you really are awake, if you really are self-aware, you understand that everything is consciousness, you are made of consciousness, therefore through the principle that we stated before, you know that you are the cause of every effect in the world. So I'm not going to overly explain the principle of cause and effect because I think it's really self-explanatory at this point. So the last principle is still something that I think the new generation is not going to like, but this is a principle of every religion, of ancient knowledge, of it's a law of the universe, guys. And it is even true for the spirit world, by the way. And it is the last law of the universe, which is the principle of genders. Very simple. I'm going to read it for you. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principle. Gender manifests in all planes. Now, gender, don't get it wrong. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be only physical, like you are a male or a female, but it is an energy. Everything has polarity. Everything in nature, in the universe, and in the spirit world, because of the three dimensions of consciousness, the three major: physical, mental, and spiritual, has a gender. We can see this in Hinduism, like I briefly mentioned before, Shiv, Kali. Every god in Hinduism has a goddess associated. Same was for the Greek, same was for the ancient Roman, same was for the ancient Egyptian. It was Isis and Osiris, Seth and Memphis. They all had their counterpart, the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine. This is found everywhere in nature, everywhere in the universe. Everything has its counterpart, not just through the law of polarity, which is negative or positive, but also through the principle of gender. Even in the spirit world, even on the mental astral plane, there are entities in spirit which are feminine or more feminine in nature, and there are entities who are more masculine in nature. However, the principle of gender also does indicate the law of balance and harmony. We do have masculine inside of us as well as feminine, and it should always be balanced, because our world only of masculine power is very, very imbalanced, as well as a world of only feminine power could be extremely imbalanced as well. It could be too centered on staying in the present moment and be too attentive to the circumstances, and masculine could be too dominant and aggressive for this world. So these two principles, through the principle of polarity and rhythm, these two genders always have to be in harmony within self, in the physical plane, in the mental plane, as well as in the spiritual plane. So I hope you guys now understand a little bit better the 7 laws of this universe. This is not something that you make this up. You can read this in the Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum, as well as the modern version, which is the Kabbalion. Understanding this law, but moreover, practicing the 7 laws within your life will lead to self-mastery and will lead to a better understanding of the universe that we live in on a mystical perspective, and will make you understand not only how to manifest material things into your life, but to better your life in living a more harmonious life holistically and overall. Let me know if you already knew this principle. If you like this sort of video, I would love to make more videos where I teach you about histories, esoteric knowledge. We dive a little bit deeper into science maybe, or with historical figures that have talked about mystical knowledge. Let me know if you like this sort of videos down below. This video has been so long, but you guys, I really needed to let it all out and explain you as best as possible, as simple as possible, what are these laws. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you very soon on this channel as well as on Patreon. I love you guys.